Okay, now I definitely am on. Right, so welcome. Thank all of you for coming. We've got Terry Lee and Betsy Morgenthaler and Bev and Gary and Nona. We've got Judith Haskell, who's our new liaison here as well. So first I want to ask if there are any oral communications from the public that are not on the agenda. Okay, that looks like a no. So our first agenda item is approval of the minutes. Let me see what was happening up there. And so thank you, Nana, for producing these minutes. Does anyone have any comments or do you want to approve them?
I approve.
Okay, I think I need a motion. Okay, great. So Bev has moved and Betsy has seconded. That will approve those minutes. Our first old business item is an update on the Hawthorns. And Bev, are you going to do that for us?
Becky is, yeah.
Betsy actually, but I will do it.
Betsy.
Whoever you are, thank you.
I handed around a few maps that are going to back up my remarks. So mostly this is a quick reporting out of what transpired at meeting 4, which was held at the Mid-Penn offices on December the 16th, and what to anticipate for meeting 5, which we anticipate, which has been scheduled for February 29th. Just waiting for the return of petition. So that is to earmark the dates for your coming calendar, should you be interested. And if you're interested, the next meeting is going to be important because we're really starting to see a wrap up of a consolidation of issues, and a wrap up is anticipated for February 29th with a site and on-site meeting scheduled for I should say 6 p.m. Thursday, February 29th at Mid-Penn offices, with a following on-site meeting at Hawthorns on Palm Sunday, March 24th at 9 a.m. And then only if needed will there be a follow-up meeting on June 13th. But that's really pending the need. So that I just close out that piece. Following that, the COG recommendation will be presented to the in-house committee, PNR, which stands for Planning and Natural Resources Committee. They will review it and forward their input along with the COG response to the board. The board will review it at their next meeting, which presumably is over the summer. And according to Mayor Wernikoff, it will not come before the town council prior to the fall of this coming year, fall 2024. So that's why I earmark February 29th would be a time when town people can make their comments. And I encourage you to do so, especially if you want to weigh in one way or the other on what I'm going to tell you. I want to call out 3 things. One is a letter that we sent out on the 10th of December, and that will appear in our next package. I have a paper copy here if anyone wants it. That letter that advocated along with the Trails Committee for the Alpine Road multi-use trail, it advocated for the expediting, if you will, of that outside of the entirety of the consideration, which is a longer process for the entirety of Hawthorns. We did learn that at this last meeting that Mid-Penn really doesn't want to expedite it. They want to consider that as a piece of the entirety in the legal process. So that will not go forward ahead of time. And then secondly, perhaps no news, but it was pointed out again in terms of the 13-acre historic complex. Mid-Penn is not open to integrating any planning that they envision for the 13 acres, though it's going to be starting in apparently first quarter 2024. They will start that planning process but they don't want to slow down the Hawthorne's process nor expedite the 13-acre historic district process to fold them together. So that left us with really the most important other piece of information I think that pertains to this committee. Trail width size, I don't, we could go into it a little bit, but I will pass over it. But it will be discussed on the 29th. So now moving on to the maps that I've handed out today, and for any listening public, these are maps which are available through the Mid-Penn Hawthorne site, public area working, public access working group, Hawthorne site. You can find these maps and they refer to options 4, 5, and 6, which is the ingress, egress, and parking areas for Hawthorns that are under current consideration. What I handed out today has the 3 maps of options 4, 5, and 6, and then the back page is Mid-Penn's evaluation of each one. And my take that I think is pretty well borne out by that last grid. And Beth, may I look at yours? Just 1 second. If you look at this grid, the green are pluses, the reds are minuses. And the little circle on the left, which is filled in a little bit or a lot, is its alignment with Mid-Penn Hawthorne's conservation easement goals. So as you look at that in totality, you can see right away that option 4 is the preferred. I will verbally just describe these quickly for anyone online that doesn't have access to these maps. Options 5 and 6, the lesser preferred, or lesser, I will say lesser aligned, would use what's known as the Hawthorne's driveway across from Roberts of Woodside. It would go up a steep hill and peel off to the left, dip down and go across another hill to the northeast. That might sound like a lot of words because it traverses a fair amount of distance, and therefore it's quite resource intensive. And that works against the principles of both Mid-Penn and the conservation easement. As well, it carries cars up and far enough away from Alpine Road that they're outside the line of visibility, that it will be more costly to patrol them, whether they're being patrolled by rangers or town sheriffs. So it opens up the possibility for, perhaps more difficulties, as does the fact that there will be traffic going across pedestrian, hiking, and bicycling paths. So there will be a lot more interaction between cars and people on feet. So that's the downside of the 5 and the 6. The downside of, what is the upside? Before I leave that, I should just say, what is the upside? The upside of particularly that driveway ingress egress is being across the street from Roberts. It's in relatively close proximity to the stop sign at Portola Valley and at Portola Road and Alpine. So cars haven't had the chance to pick up speed. And they're also on a relatively flat terrain, good visibility. Of course, there's Roberts across the street with the comings and goings there, so it's a little bit more traffic burdened, but it's definitely the preferred ingress egress of BPTS committee because of bicycle safety issues. So if option 4 were selected, which I will tell you about in a moment, they would need to do a fair amount of remedial work to radically improve bike safety. Option 4 is located on Alpine Road between Nathorst and Hillbrook. So the ingress would be uphill a bit, and as you drive in a couple of car lengths, you turn left paralleling Alpine Road to a parking strip that goes down approximately to the opposite Hilltop, Hillbrook. I'm not forgetting the name. The advantages are easy to discern. There, it's close proximity, easier to patrol. It does not have the cars and hikers running into each other. And I think that just is about it. A lot of words for what was supposed to be a short report.
No, thank you. It's great to see these for
If
sure.
there are any questions?
I have a question. Where did this come from?
Mid Peninsula. That was in the package that went out with the agenda package of the December 16th meeting.
Oh, okay.
It's on this website that we have a link to in
It's
the
on the
agenda too.
website,
So
yeah.
anyone online can get to these maps through the link on the agenda.
Betsy, question? I couldn't help but asking. I see there's identified on these maps a milkweed patch.
Several.
There was, are there actually one?
There,
There,
well,
but
thank you. Yeah, there is. And I wish I knew more about it. I noticed the same. I've only been able to get on site once. And that one particular time we were instructed to go up to the driveway and park, and we did the entire touring at the top. And I forgot to check the milkweed patch. That was back in November. So I'm as curious as you are. I'll meet you there when they let us on, Gary.
Okay, good. Get a picture of it, send it back. I'd like to see it.
So I think we can move on.
Wait, Nana's got a question.
Question. Would there be additional screening if they were adopted, because that's pretty early in the scene. Yeah, and I actually think that they're going to abide, as far as I have heard thus far, they intend to abide by the 70-foot setback. And I don't actually know right now, but it would be interesting me to know how you measure 70 feet. Right? Do you measure it direct, or do you measure it uphill? It could come into play. There is some cut and fill involved in this one for sure, but lesser than the other two.
If I can inject a really quick technical note, according to the zoning code, it is horizontal, so you have to kind of go up on one side or the other. So it's not the slope, it's the horizontal 70 feet.
Why, thank you, David. If you can quote your source on that at some point, I'd be interested to know. I
Oh,
mean,
sure.
I'm sure you're getting it out of the general plan.
I wouldn't say the
Land
general
use?
plan, but we're putting in a generator on a slope, and so I'm kind of deep into this, but so I'm
Ah.
happy to provide the source.
Thank you. Very useful comment.
Thank you, David.
I also had a question about the first item that you mentioned in the three items that you wanted to bring up, where you said that the multi-use trail option would not be expedited. Did they say why?
No. Excuse me, the languaging that I mentioned earlier, they prefer to incorporate it into the major negotiation. So I suspect that you can read between the lines as well as I. Thank you. You're welcome.
Are there any other questions? Right, Betsy, thank you as always for putting this together. The next agenda item we have is in reference to an ongoing conversation we've been having about the opportunities that may arise for using the Open Space Acquisition Fund in support of more open space in Portola Valley for our community. And so we had been thinking about a piece of land that has since sold. And the opportunity now is to have a conversation about whether we want to position ourselves or ideas for positioning ourselves moving forward. So, go ahead, Beth.
No, I just don't hear you.
You can't hear me. I'm sorry. I feel very loud because it's being magnified, but you
I
can't
see.
hear me. Yeah. So
My good ear.
thank you. I want your good ear. I'm inviting a conversation about this as something we've been thinking about over time, and hopefully other opportunities will come up. We had been doing some brainstorming about how to do it. So I was asked to put this on the agenda to open up this conversation for the committee.
Sorry, are you moving to Jellich?
Yes,
Oh, okay. Well,
go ahead.
It's still on the table. It's still
Okay.
under contract. I talked to Ginny today.
Okay.
And she can't talk about anything, she can't talk about anything. That's it. It's still under contract.
Got it.
Jellich to the people who have proposed buying it. Yeah. Not
Okay.
us, but somebody
Yes,
else.
somebody else. Great.
It's under contract.
It's under con- So we'll see what happens with that. But I think the idea of putting this on the agenda was when this came up, we were all of a sudden scrambling to think about what the possibilities were.
That's right.
And so maybe anticipating opportunities like this again can be something that the committee starts to think about. Go ahead, Betsy, help me out.
Well, I thank you. I think that the Jellic opportunity was so intoxicating. It was certainly intoxicating for me. And I trust that the very happy buyer will do well by the land. And perhaps if I am going to turn this into lemonade, perhaps they will have the deeper resources to continue the incredible job that the Whites have done there. And we will be just as well off. That's what I am holding on to that thought. And I thought it was a terrific opportunity for us to both corral the very idea that we have funds and that we could put them to incredible use, such as that. I thought was a good exercise. And particularly as just yesterday, we now have a housing element that's been accepted by the state.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh,
that's the
yeah.
hot news
Oh, I
yesterday.
didn't hear that.
I'm surprised you didn't see the smoke signals going up everywhere.
Oh,
Yeah. So there's a lot of possibility. There are a lot of possibilities out there for us. I mean, when I say a lot of possibilities, not concrete ones that we know about, or they would have been surfaced already, but there is potential. And in order to realize what unknown potential there is, it will take almost everybody in town to support the finding and vetting of these possibilities. Do some of them exist in town-owned properties? We've gone through those so well that, who knows, maybe. But there might be other diamonds in the rough out there that come before us. And if so, I would like our committee to be at least well enough organized that we have a script of how we're going to respond to that. Because if we don't, I think we just don't want to miss that opportunity. So both when we're looking at the size of the fund that we have now, which sadly we can't get a firm grasp of until we
don't know what it is.
until we get help from finance. But we're going to say that it's roughly $8 million. If we can trust some of the recent numbers we've seen, it's roughly $8 million as we stand. And it will be growing a lot faster now that as of January, the town manager has invested approximately 12 million, which is more than we have, in interest-bearing accounts. So I know that we talked about that last time, and that's the good news.
That's great news.
So it will be, so whatever our revenue is estimated to be this year is based on old information. As of January, it's going to be growing at a better clip. In any case, the question about how to put those funds to use given that it's 8 million, not 100 million, is really, I think we could open up our thinking beyond land acquisition to conservation easements. That's one idea. We can talk about that at another meeting. That's not on the agenda, but with Judith here as a co-author of the post-adoption plan, the post-adoption plan is officially and was officially inaugurated yesterday as the housing element passed. And so I thought I would read from the September 13th was when the town council adopted a goodly portion of the post-adoption plan. And I'm going to read just a couple of sentences from the background piece that Judith and Craig presented to the town. They say, as background, in May 2023, the town council agreed to a high-level post-adoption housing element plan and directed our subcommittee to develop a more detailed approach to the actions. I'm skipping forward. On August 9th, the town council discussed in a study session the contents of this more detailed plan. Our subcommittee then updated that to reflect comments made in that meeting and adjust the timing of various steps. I'm now skipping over a paragraph and a sentence. We recognize that implementation of the plan will require engagement by the council, the committees and commissions, town residents, and town staff over time. So that brings us to some of the timing, and that's why I wanted to talk about it today, because specifically action T 1.1, which evaluates the sunrise opportunity sites, and those are the means by which we might be able to unburden, in part at least, Ford Field. And I'm thinking particularly about the repair of Heritage Oakdale. Whether we can unburden all 50 units, that might be a very tall order, especially with $8 million. However, I remain hopeful. The thing is timing. In short, the paperwork that I handed out says, in short, initial lists of viable housing site alternatives should be completed no later than August 2024. So we really have the next 7 months to pull this off. By May 2024, as in 3 months from now, the subcommittee will develop timelines for a work product for a new ad hoc committee. Final report will be submitted to the town council no later than 3 months prior to the expiration of the sunrise period. So I think that the end of the sunrise period is 2 years from its acceptance, but I think clarification and elaboration on any of that, Judith, we would welcome.
Dana, I see you, and I'm going to come back to you after Judith
And
answers
as
this
well,
question.
any brainstorming that you might have to add to this.
So to clarify where we are on the post-adoption plan. Several months ago, we discussed it and adopted not all of it, okay? So we adopted it in principle a year ago, and then we were tasked with bringing it back for more detail and timelines. What we did pass was those items that were easy. They didn't require a big budget. They didn't require forming committees and staff time and all of that. So 1.1 and 1.2, the only portion of that we have approved is the subcommittee for outreach. So that's Mary and me. And we've been doing initial exploration in advance of submission and approval of the housing element. Now that it is approved, we are going to have in the next month or two, Sharif needed to put budget information around the remaining items that are more complicated, that require more resources. So that will come up again. And Craig and I are shepherding that along. I'm on 2 subcommittees on the ad hoc, sorry, not on ad hoc, on housing issues. So it's going to get a little confusing. Mary and I are the subcommittee for outreach on specific sites. Craig and I, however, are on the subcommittee to make sure the rest of these operative points are addressed, budgeted as needed, and approved formally. So we haven't yet formally approved that 1.1 beyond just the very initial step. Okay. It's approved in principle, but the date might move and the specific approach, my council members have to confirm that they're comfortable given the budget that has to come up. So there's a budgeting function that we need. We still, Craig and I are still keeping to that, and in principle, that is where we will go. The timeline might move a little bit, but we don't have a lot of time built in. We will have to be looking at something like this timeline, if not that exact timeline. So when it comes up again, and we've been discussing agendizing it, not in the next meeting, but very soon, you will hear more about it. And Craig and I are in the process. So your discussion today is actually timely because we can hear your thoughts on, do you want to be involved? How do you want to be involved? And then separately on the actual use of your funds, we have to make sure that whatever you're deciding is within the scope of your committee, which I'm not seeing any problems there. But for example, if you said we want $8 million to go to buying land for the housing, that would be outside your purview. But, you know, defining what it is that you would be looking to potentially purpose that funding for, that's a good input for us as well. So I would encourage you to have that discussion. See, you know, you don't have to get to the granular level of we would do this, not this tonight, but I'd like to hear your thoughts. We would be greatly concerned if X, Y, or Z, or we would be generally supportive of a conservation easement, that type of thing. And you don't have to decide everything tonight, but I want to keep in close discussion between now and the approval of the detailed post-adoption plan, timelines, and logistics. Does that help? Any
Yes.
questions?
Thank you, Julie.
Not instantly, but there will be probably. I mean, I imagine that there's some interest around here, and I will have questions coming up, but they might not all flood to mind right now.
Of course not.
I misunderstood. I did re-listen to the meeting, and I had thought that T 1.1, from what I could hear from the September 13th meeting, I thought it passed.
The
So,
piece of it that passed was the subcommittee.
I see.
Because if you form an ad hoc committee, that takes staff time and resources. And that's the line we kind of drew when the council discussed it. So it wasn't mapped one for one. 1.1 is absolutely passed. The piece that everyone did agree to was a subcommittee. Maybe you could read it that way, but let's be honest, any subcommittee requires staff support.
Yeah.
And so we're going to have to align with what that looks like and what the ad hoc committee should be comprised of. That's something that the council needs to get to the next level of detail on.
Well, it doesn't take me to point out that May 2024 and August 2024 are very close.
Absolutely. No, we all have to get on it. And that's why I wouldn't hold back on your discussion or input and feedback. I would make sure you're thinking ahead a little bit and keeping in touch with me as the liaison. Definitely, I'll be here, and I'm going to be working with Craig on the subcommittee. So you'll have a way to have input on what goes before and is discussed as a practical approach. Let me put it that way.
It seems like we're definitely going to agendize this for our next meeting, but we would also maybe have a preliminary conversation now, since it is on the agenda, about what we're thinking. Go ahead, Gary. Oh,
Yes,
Deanna,
again.
I really am going to come to you, but Gary, go ahead.
Very interesting, but I'm totally in the dark on this. This document that you're reading from, Betsy?
It's in your
Tina?
package that I have.
It is there?
It's behind the maps, isn't it?
This is behind the map.
Copy
Yeah,
one?
yeah.
It's in-
Oh, well, this is a cheat sheet. I'll pass it around. It came from, that's more complete. This is an incomplete version of that. And Terry has. copy that I handed you.
Yep.
If you don't need it, can I give it to Terry? And this comes out of the same, I was just trying to save paper. This is the entirety of T1, T1.2, T2, T3.1. Some of them went by and a few of them were held back for greater consideration because of staffing.
And
Sorry,
budget. I mean,
and staff, yeah,
importantly,
budget,
with our
resources.
financial
Right,
situation, we're
right.
being, prudent about what we do.
I did not, I'll print it out and send it to each one of you if you like. But you can, otherwise you can look at my copy.
Well, and since all of this has happened very recently, and this part of it isn't agendized or in our overall packet, we can get more specifics as you guys get more specifics together. And so maybe the conversation we can have right now is a little bit more general about suddenly this moment arriving for us that we've been anticipating in various ways. My sense is, in my time on this committee, we've been very intent on relieving the pressure on Dorothy Ford Field and Park. That is my long running sense of this. Are there other aspects of where we are now that are raised by this? That's kind of all I thought about. So I'm wondering if folks on the committee have been thinking about other ways we are wanting to weigh in besides relieving that pressure.
I would urge you to focus on that because it is
Okay.
the here and now and the near term. And we have a deadline.
Got it. Okay. So that's,
But another deadline to bring, am I interrupting you?
No.
One more, two more deadlines to just keep in mind as well. And this comes off the most recent submission, but was first called out in our July 25th submission, and we got feedback from
yes.
HCD. This is a fine print copy of, I'm going to just read you because you would, your eyes have to be like super sharp. Okay. If we've not, so this is my words, if we've not found a suitable alternative prior to this point, in a year and a quarter, in May 2025, we have an obligation to initiate site planning at Ford Open Space. So that's a year and a quarter away. And then January 2026 is 2 years out. And that's when we will put out our request for a proposal to the developers. So that's the broader time horizon. And these other time points are, as you work back from there, what the subcommittees and board and council thinks they need to work with. So really, I agree with the two of you that this conversation, certainly the Sunrise, is focused on Ford, and we can go out and acquire new land as beautiful as Ford, or we can do everything we can to protect Ford.
Let me do this. Dana, your hand has been up a really long time. I think that's you, Dana.
Can just let me make
Yeah.
one last comment. I'll sit down
Yeah,
and then
sure.
Dave can go. There are other elements of the post-adoption plan when you get to see what the council approves, the detailed level. But things like making sure the infrastructure in the town and the level of services are at the right level. And I would imagine a piece of that is a question on whether the experience of living in town has to, what needs to be done as we're increasing density in order to preserve that type of experience, like to have access to trails or recreation, and are they interchangeable? And it's not necessarily all in your purview, but it is something I would urge you to keep your eye on. But that's going to come later, I think.
Sure. So just to make sure that I understand, it might be that this committee would do some advocating for increased open spaces to offset the change in the town that would be wrought by higher density. Is that kind of what you just said?
Advocating and, weighing in on, well, if you take that approach, that open space access might be diminished or complicated. I think there could be multiple ways you can weigh in and monitor as these questions are discussed. But yes, that is,
So we might be doing some shepherding
yeah.
of the open spaces as they're getting imagined.
And you're experts on it. Keep in mind, far more than maybe not Craig, but the most of the council at this point, and weighing in as we're discussing these things could be useful to help prioritize, to help, realize some things we might not be taking into account. So do watch that. But I think given the tight timeline for the sunrise provision, it would be very prudent to focus on that. So
Thank
I'll
you
let-
for explaining that. I appreciate it. Dana, would you like to say something? Yeah. Right. Take your hand down and put it back up again if you come back to us. All right. So we've been invited now to have a conversation about how we will begin to advise the council in thinking about this next stage. Additional thoughts besides agendizing it for more detailed discussion next time? Very good, Gary.
No, I don't have much to say on it yet because I don't know anything about it. So I haven't been able to keep up with things going on in town for the past couple of months. But yes, and we need to agendize it fairly soon.
Great.
What are you thinking? In a month or something in that order?
Well,
or less?
if it feels like we should do it in a month, maybe we should do it in a month, give everybody time to get educated about it. But if we wait 2 months, we're going to be pretty close to May. And that, right. So it seems like maybe we're going to try and meet again next month. Does that feel right? Okay. That's good.
I mean, we could start to
Okay.
peel off,
Let's see.
thoughts that are coming into our mind, but I think it'd be a more thoughtful conversation and a more inclusive conversation if we met, if we were all willing to meet in a month's time rather than 2 months' time. We could give more thought to it and wouldn't be recorded saying stupid things.
Yeah, let's avoid being recorded saying stupid things. And maybe we can keep that agenda narrow. Do you have like a special meeting on that? That makes a lot of sense. But I did have a lot of nods here, Judith, that we're very intent on this relieving of pressure project, and I think we will all look forward to helping with that. Okay, so go ahead.
I'd just like to suggest that we might leave this meeting with some ideas for what should go into the sort of thought preparation for
That's a
that
great
next
idea.
meeting. And that might include things like lessons learned from thinking about Jellic, or lessons learned from our agenda packet tonight, which had a lot of information on conservation easements that are already in place. And do we know where all of them are and what additional ones might be useful or needed? So I think we probably all have questions in the back of our minds about what should go into that conversation in terms of like first principles.
And I was starting to, at a humble level, starting to Google how you value conservation easements. So that will be an interest. One of the lessons learned from Jellic is it's very hard for a town to acquire land. It's such a sensitive process anyway, and there's so many unknowns. Between surfacing all of those unknowns and doing so in a timely way and then corralling the numbers of people, it's going to be a long shot acquiring a piece of property. It will have to be handled differently, of course, much more targeted and efficient than we were. That's not surprising. I just want to point out it's such a steep mountain to climb that there are a lot of ways that we could screw it up incidentally, pardon my French. So the conservation easement in particular is attractive for that reason. I mean, it's a surer thing. And when I think about conservation easement and I look at our bank account, it's more doable that way too. But I don't begin to know how to value.
So it seems like one of the things we're going to need to talk about at the next meeting is how is the committee feeling about conservation easements, and what do we understand really about how they might work in these situations? So there's some homework to be done. maybe.
And this is a little more tangential, but actually also to the heart of it. I was thinking about our committee and a little bit how we might recruit in some of that talent.
Yeah,
So let's all put our thinking caps on there and
we need a land use lawyer.
yeah,
Right away. Either on the committee or willing to volunteer.
exactly. We could
to-
make them
To come. hang
a
out
nice
with
little
us.
satellite. If that's-
David, I just saw your hand come up. Are you a volunteer of?
No, I just want to make a point about conservation easements, and I know more about them in Texas probably than California. But typically, it's not like you have to give anybody any money. The point is that they get a huge tax break for the easement. And somebody has to sign off on the fact that that easement is valuable. But it's not like they get cash typically. It's more a negotiated settlement on, I need a tax write-off for X and you guys want this land and all that. So I think it's a great strategy and I don't think it has to consume any cash is my experience. So thanks.
Thank you, David. That's a very good point. And you and I think like private citizens where the tax advantages would be compelling. If you're thinking like the town, if you're thinking, with your town hat on, then the tax advantage would not be there, right? So they would need, if we were thinking about putting a conservation easement on Ford, for instance.
Oh,
Just
that's
for
a whole
instance.
separate, that's
Yeah,
a whole
yeah,
separate point. I was
yeah.
thinking like if somebody buys a Jellic Ranch and wants to put a conservation easement on it, us putting something on Ford is kind of a non sequitur.
And
We already
Jellic
own it.
Ranch, you're so right. And Jellic Ranch fortunately has a very different kind of a conservation easement on it called the San Andreas Fault.
Yeah.
So yes, right.
But I get that, but that doesn't mean that you can't give whoever buys it a huge tax benefit by putting in writing that they're not going to develop on that area. And that's money to them because they get to write that off, even though maybe they couldn't develop it on it anyway. That's a benefit to them. It costs nothing to us. So I think that's the trick if with conservation easements is that the owner gets something that maybe they don't give up that much, but we think it's worth something, so they get tax benefits.
I want to get you a sandwich board and have you walk up and down Alpine Road.
Well, that
I'll
was my
put that
last
on our
job.
list.
Yeah, that was last year I did that, but not this year.
I've got another public comment. It says iPhone 5 on my screen, so I don't know who I'm inviting into the conversation, but go ahead.
That's me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. This is Catherine McGill. Sorry, I've been listening in and David is right about the conservation easements and it's the same in California. But it also touches on something that I've been thinking about a lot is keeping track of all the conservation easements that we have in town. And I think this is a little bit tangential, but it's something that we should really think about putting some resources into creating a database of all the conservation easements that are currently exist in town. And it would just require somebody going to the county title office and going through and finding them. But anyway, that's all I have to say.
Thank you. That's now on this long list that I'm making of things we need to find out about. Dana, are you back with us?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
It's great to see all of you guys together. And I'm glad I waited for Judith to speak because, I think it is really important for your committee to provide leadership, to the council and the town about what you think we should do, all of you together. That was one point. The other thing is I want to remind everyone, and I bring this up now and then, about we have $100,000+ out there with pertaining to the frog pond that we raised within 10 days to save the frog pond. It's just sitting there. Had we collected it and it would be making, it would be getting money off of it, you know, it could be used down the line. Now, if the town is not going to use it for the frog pond land, you know, it would still be great, I think, to gather it and give it to you guys. So that's another point. But I also want to say that we, you know, we raised $100,000 in a week. You know, when I was taking people on tours of Jellic, and that happened a couple of times, people were pretty excited about even raising the money to buy Jellic. So I think I'd love to see you guys also provide leadership there. I think it's doable. You know, if we get to a situation where there's something out there that's fabulous, I think we could raise some money with your leadership. Anyway, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jana. Bev. Oh, I keep calling you Bev, Betsy. I don't know what's wrong
That's
with
okay.
my brain.
Because
I know who you are. I know who both of you are. I apologize.
I was going to say Dana is, first of all, was the fundraiser par excellence on Frog Pond. So we have her to thank for that $100,000, and the collection of it, Dana, I suspect, will be a lot easier, as our town financials right now are, there's so many unknowns and questions around the details there that I think that we would have a lot of confidence in paying those dues. And I think perhaps, you know, like the library sends out dues notices. Maybe it's time to send out a dues notice and say, thank you for your patience while the town squares away finances, but you can expect that we will ask, as soon as we can show you that our books are in order, we're going to ask for your pledge. You know, something that gives them a nod to understanding why there might have been some reluctance out there, perhaps, but that we still know and we're paying attention.
Can
Well,
someone
we
help me
better
understand?
hurry. We have to hurry because 2 of our people have died. So
Well, we will get a move on, huh?
let's
But
get a move
Dana,
on.
I think maybe that we're going to need your help with that, right? Because I think that the pledges were, the ask came from you, and the ask didn't come from Open Space, it came from you. But we're here to support you.
Ultimately, I think it was the Conservation Committee. I think it sort of sits in the hands of Conservation and Nona. So Nona knows a lot about it too. But I just feel sad that it's just sitting there, you know, and I feel like we should do something with it. Okay.
Okay, Jana, thank you for that. And I'm going to add that to our agenda or running list of agenda items, is figuring out how to invite those pledges to be honored, and doing so at a time when the town can actually receive that money and account for it. So that can be on our radar screen. And Danny, you've raised something that I want to add to our list, which is, I feel like I've been so intent on Ford Field that I haven't been thinking about the ways that we should be partnering with people in the community who have resources they might be excited to use on open space in a forward-looking way. So I wonder if we could have a subcommittee or some kind of plan for being open to partnering with others, because we're probably not going to be able to do it all by ourselves when these kinds of opportunities come up. Instead of scrambling to try and partner in the community when a property comes up. But I think we've all felt like, oh, well, nothing's going to come up. And then that proved untrue. So maybe in a forward-looking way, doing some community outreach, asking some questions, putting on the website, kind of an invitation, whatever it is. Like, I think maybe that should be part of our project as well, right? So it's not a post hoc kind of scrambling to put a group together. So that's going to go on this list as well. So it's not just dealing with the emergency of Ford Field, but also it could be an and. Thoughts now that we're making this big list about things that we should do to get ready for the next conversation. Terry.
Is this on?
It is.
So the Jellic Ranch situation reminded me that two things. One, the idea that partnering with highly resourced, experienced expert acquirers and managers like MidPen and others could be a really useful tool for us to be able to move more quickly and expertly in future situations where the scale of the funds and the complexity of the acquisition and ownership and operations is beyond what we as a volunteer committee or as a town, with frankly limited resources, not just financial, but limited resources, could bring to bear. So that was a really big aha, I felt like, as we were going through that process of imagining what could we do. And so I liked the suggestion. I felt like you were just reminding us of how do we invest in expanding our relationship and rapport with these really expert organizations whose whole purpose is to do this kind of work, financially and otherwise. And then the second thought, which I think we talked about before and is clearly a little out of the box, but to me intriguing, is whether or not we could more seriously consider using some of the funds that we have and hopefully will continue to accumulate to help address the affordable housing requirement creatively by basically buying Ford Field again, even though we already own it, indirectly by doing something like incentivizing property owners to add an ADU that qualifies for the housing element requirement on their property. They own it, but our open space fund would contribute, and this is just an idea, $50,000 for each qualifying unit. And if someone puts 2 units on their property, then they get 100,000 towards whatever their project is that qualifies to meet the affordable housing obligations of the town, and in a way is buying down the pressure on the open space that we have that might otherwise get sacrificed to meet that need. And just, doing a silly math exercise that I just did in my head, for 50 units at 50,000 a unit, that's only $2.5 million. And that is a big investment for sure. And it doesn't sound like it's for open space. But if we if we invested $2.5 million in 50 units spread around town in a way that is in the interest of those property owners, we would in essence be protecting all of the open space at Ford Field. And so that's what I meant by buying it again, but at a lot less than it would ever possibly cost us if we were to try and acquire a similar property today. So, that's a very out of the
Yeah,
box.
I've got Judith. Go ahead.
Yeah, but anyway, just thinking of those kinds of possibilities as well.
I encourage you to be as creative as possible, but to make sure I point out a few things that you should check before you proceed. One is there is an affordable housing fund, and you all weighed in on the use of that fund. And we have a policy that's very, very high level. So I would imagine you should look at that and figure out where that went in order to inform any similar project. The other piece is for the housing element, we would have the burden of showing to HCD that we'd have to make a resubmission and say we will build the 50 units and they would have to be affordable. The problem with ADUs is that unless they're deed restricted, they're not really going to suffice for the lowest, the affordability levels. And that, and Dorothy Ford Field is the one place in town that this was long discussed, and I'm paraphrasing here and probably getting it wrong, but where you get the scale in the economy to build 50 affordable, low and very low income units. So it's not just 50 units, it's at that level that Ford Field was sufficing. So when you think about things, that's what you're aiming for to save Dorothy Ford Field. And I encourage you to be as creative as possible, but don't recreate the wheel. Look for those parameters first.
I really appreciate that reminder. And again, this is just ideating. I don't know, for example, acknowledging that if you build an ADU for a retired family member who has very little income, if that qualifies as a, you know, potentially a affordable or very low income unit that meets the requirements. And again, I'm not trying to have that whole discussion tonight and
No,
anyway, but I'm acknowledging.
But there is some background on that, and you have to deed restrict it. You have to say, I, for 50 years is the standard. You could probably go less, but like 50 years is what is very comfortable for HCD, it seems. You can go more. So the mechanics of demonstrating and convincing HCD that those ADUs can count. JADUs seem more realistic, to be honest, because you have less capital expenditure. And I would encourage you actually to look at that, but would someone put on their deed or their property that I will not rent this out unless it's low or very low income for 50 years? Some people will, but it's going to be something people stop and think about. So, and if you have questions like that, feel free to email me. And I don't want to pepper the planning director. We have an interim one now, but I'm more than happy to get those questions and consolidate and see when a window to talk about them all together is. So again, I encourage the creativity because that's what we need. But let's be organized and about how we get the info you need.
Great. And maybe as you guys come up with questions, as we're having big ideas, I can be the clearinghouse for going to Judith, and then Judith can manage that so we don't reinvent a bunch of wheels maybe. But
I was
thank you,
going to
Terry, for
just
that. Go ahead.
weigh in on, Terry, your first comment about involving other agencies in Mid-Penn. I don't know if you meant it in this way, but at one point I was thinking, particularly smarting from the loss or the possible potential loss of Ford Field, I was starting to wonder about our committee's view about transferring open space land over to Mid-Peninsula. Of course, we're an advisory group. This would go to the town council. But if that were, if HCD didn't look at us as being so land wealthy, and we put it truly locked it up with Mid-Penn, whether that was part of the line of your thinking or not, I don't know.
Well, just in response to that particular question or comment, I wasn't particularly thinking of Ford Field as something that would be of interest to a Mid-Penn, only because my impression is that they tend to work at a scale that makes sense for their investment of organization and resource, and that Ford Field is really important to us as a town and community, but its scale doesn't feel as meaningful for them, whereas Jellicoe Ranch is a much greater scale, and its adjacency to, you know, their existing properties made it to me more alluring. But the general idea that for a property where the owner is putting it to market, that's a very different environment than where we have an owner who's thinking about and willing to like gift it to the town, maybe in exchange for something, but maybe not on the open market at an open market value, and is willing to work with us over an extended period of time as their preferred path. That's a totally different situation to me than, you know, a Jalix Ranch situation where that's not where they're at, not because they weren't caring about, you know, what would happen to it or what it could mean for the town, but that wasn't their priority. So I feel like, you know, for bigger properties where there would be a really compelling opportunity for a partner organization, not just a meaning to the town, because we could find meaning in a very small parcel. But an organization like that, I wonder if it would be as meaningful.
I think this question of scale, though, is a good one for us to keep in mind. There are things that are sort of like our size, and there are things we care about that are bigger than us, as you guys tracking the Hawthorns have shown, right? And so keeping our eye on different scales of projects and then thinking about different partners at those different scales, right? I like that for sure. David, you've had your hand up.
Sure. Just a real quick technical point. Ford Field, the baseball field actually has an easement or whatever, a lien to the state because we borrowed money to build it. So we would need to pay that back. And of course, the town loves that. So the field part is one thing. And then across the easement that lets it go across the creek to the Kelly property, there's another 2 acres, which, as people have pointed out, is pretty small. But I just want to point out that it's not like we have one contiguous parcel that we have sole control over currently. We did, if you will, borrow a bunch of money from the state to build the Little League field, and that was in exchange for keeping it a Little League field for some number of years. Thanks.
David, do you happen to have your hands on the document and know how much in debt we would be to the state? Is that an
Oh,
unknown?
Well,
It's not
maybe we
unknown.
shouldn't.
It's
Go
less
ahead,
than $1
Judith.
million. Okay, go ahead.
David, I'm going to cut you off because Judith
There
has
is
this information.
There's information in a planning commission meeting where I remember Nicholas commenting on this. It's not that much. I mean, we paid off a fair amount and we have a bit to go. It would be something to stop and think about. But I'll see if I can recall, generally speaking, what time frame and what meeting.
Thank you for raising that, David. So in the interest of getting through our agenda, because we have, go ahead, Nona.
I just wanted to add one thing to what Terry said, which is that I remember when I first joined this committee, a lot of what happened was that there were people on the committee who really knew the town and the parcels and the townspeople and sort of knew what might become available and who to talk to about that. And I was just thinking that as we think about recruiting a new member to this committee, potentially, that we think about people who have their antennae, you know, sort of out there and really attuned to that. I mean, I just thinking about Gary and Chip used to talk about that all the time.
Can I just, if we were ridiculously lucky, if we were, and we found 2 people, we're a 7-person committee. We could take it to the town council and maybe become an 8-person committee there if the liaison thought that were a good idea. I'm planting the seed just in case.
Let's set that as a goal to have that.
Wouldn't that be a
problem.
nice
Yes,
problem
let's
to
have the
have?
goal of having the problem of being too big a committee. I love that. Great. So I feel like I've got a running list here of some things we need to do some research about and some sort of content we can put on the agenda for this conversation we're going to have in a month, and I'll see about setting that up. We also have a few more items on the agenda, and we're going to lose Betsy, which we don't want to do before we've gotten a little further. So are you, is the committee comfortable with me moving on, saying yes to this ongoing conversation? Okay, great. We have been having a bit of a running conversation about spending on open spaces that the town is doing. And this last year, money got pulled out of a small percentage of what was coming into the open space fund got pulled out to cover maintenance. And it's been a challenge to figure out what's been getting spent, what we need to be spending, what the Conservation Committee has been asking for, what's been getting done. And I haven't made a lot of progress. Catherine's been really, really helpful. And so I want to just sort of like put a marker down here that it does seem like we know what we're paying the independent contractor who's coming in and doing the work to support the natives, the native plants, and that is much less than there's sort of like $90,000 being bandied around at one point. And that contract looks more like $24,000 a year, which is much less than even the 40 that we were led to believe might not be enough to be covering those kinds of things. I haven't been able to totally understand yet how much of the mowing is falling under the category of fire safety in the town's general budget or specific to open space, right? There's some more research to be done. But my feeling is that we don't have an emergency of being down, tens of thousands of dollars compared to what was actually being spent. I think it was a little bit of confusion. And so as we go forward, we have better information now to think about allocating those funds. It's not, the council hasn't asked us to do that again yet, but it's on the horizon. So I think we have better information now, and we'll continue to work as the town sorts out what's been getting spent on actually knowing what's being spent and what we're talking about will cost. So that's kind of my update, is we are getting better information, and that process is ongoing. Catherine.
Yes, I just wanted to say that the 24,000 is included within the 44 or 45 or whatever it is that we're talking about. So
Yes.
good. Okay.
Yes, I'm sorry if I was unclear. We didn't know how much of that 44,000 was that contract. And so now we know.
Right.
Yeah.
About half of it.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that.
Sure.
For sure. So I'll keep running this down, but that's the update on that.
So
Go
are
ahead.
you running down
Well-
figures that you are all going to share with the subcommittee? Is that the plan?
Catherine, I just cut you off.
I was just going to say that I'm not sure that there's really any more information that can be obtained. I think I just don't think that the data is available. So I wouldn't stress about spending time trying to get more information. This is it.
So I guess the more information would be next time we're doing this budgeting, knowing how much of what we're budgeting for is this specific contract and how much of it is the maintenance that's being done by the folks at the town, and how that's being accounted. That's what I will continue to keep asking about, is the stuff that we're not contracting outside. How are we budgeting that?
Right, and improved accounting of that is really, until that gets in place, I mean, that's the one thing that we really need, is an improved accounting.
We agree. So yeah, that's the missing information that hopefully will come.
Yeah, I'd just like to suggest that the path for that discussion sort of start with conservation, because conservation surveys each of the properties to see what's really needed in terms of maintenance, and then goes to Public Works and says, this is what we think are the priorities. And then they figure out how much they can do, how much has to be contracted out. So the reason open space came into the conversation was because there was the possibility of taking more than 10% of the UUT this year, is my understanding.
I think
I just don't want too many people to be stressing and arguing over what's a
Yes.
relatively small amount of
So-
money.
So absolutely, the only reason I'm talking about this is because it came to us, but we should be following conservation's lead for sure. I think there's agreement, and we have a subcommittee that is liaising with conservation now, right, of this committee. And so that makes sense as the place that it flows through. That seems right.
And may I just weigh in? I'm not an accountant by training, but when I dive into numbers and try to make sense of them, I can get a little bit accounting like. And when the numbers add up and the total at the bottom that I read is the total that I get on my little ticker tape, it's very reassuring. When it's not, I'll go back over it 3 times to see where I've made a mistake. I then will start to look further and further. And in doing so with the numbers, there are various numbers that have floated around in open space work. There are a lot of anomalous little, does it make a lot of money here and there? Maybe not, but collectively it makes me cuckoo. And towards that, I was reaching out to a member of finance, and I wondered in part whether at some point our subcommittee wouldn't like to meet with some volunteer from finance to help us sort some of this out directly with the financial in town. We heard at our last meeting that this was a very low priority item.
Yes, we
And
did.
I get that they were busy putting $12 million to work for us. Yay for priorities. But when this becomes a higher level priority, I just don't want to be old and gray because I'll have forgotten it by then.
Sure. So I'm adding to our running agenda a future subcommittee maybe with or some kind of connection with finance. I think that's a great idea so that it's not so mysterious when we are talking about these things. I'm going to move on to our new business if you'll allow me to. Betsy has very graciously agreed to take over as chair for me. She's been the vice chair. And so that is either something we can do today or do at the next meeting, but it will be good for that change to come. And I would be happy to become secretary so that Nona is relieved of doing minutes, which she's been doing so beautifully for us for a very long time. But also on our agenda today, I know that you wanted to sort of talk about the changes coming up. So what's the best way to use this time? Should we
Well, I
do the leadership at the next meeting or?
I'm indifferent about that piece,
Okay.
but I think you and I had a conversation about it. It was very important to identify the vice chair because I believe in service, but I also believe in rotating doors and would feel that finding a vice chair that would be ready, more or less a year from now, to step in so that we all get a turn at the helm would be great.
So shall we do that before we actually rotate?
I think it's a package deal.
Seems quite reasonable.
I really got my hands full. Yeah. I know. Trying to organize hiking and, with the Sierra Club and we travel a lot and, yeah, thank you though. Thank you though.
Well, this might also be part of our big recruiting project as well, to find someone who'd like to come on and maybe fill that vice chair role. Or is there somebody else in the room who wants to be vice chair?
You're willing to be
No.
secretary? Okay.
Thank you. Nan.
Okay. Shall we vote on this? now then?
As Tishan would say, that was very gracious.
Yes, indeed. And I'm feeling guilty now because my idea was to get you to do less, not more, but I guess that's how this is going to go. Maybe if we bring some more folks onto the committee, we can revisit whether or not we'll put Nona on there. So is there a motion to do some voting on this, Terry? float. There, second. Thank you, Carrie. All in favor? Here we go. All right, that is a unanimous vote. Thank you very much to these lovely, lovely people doing this. So our last,
May I
yes,
just ask a couple of quick questions before the last question that you have in mind,
yes.
which is, how do you all feel just collectively about 5 o'clock meeting time in lieu of 7? It's not a deal breaker, but it's an idea since we all got ourselves here. That's my main one. I think I have something else, but I can't remember what it
That's your
was.
platform, actually, Mary, as the chair.
It feels a little fresher for me, but if y'all are stuck on 7, I'm going with 7.
So is that an action item or are we just going to nod at you? I think we're going to nod at you.
What do you think, Deb?
It doesn't matter to me.
Doesn't?
No.
Cool.
I feel pressure. Great. And so our last agenda item, Betsy, was actually something that you had raised as sort of like restructuring of some committee stuff in the future. Do you want to just put that on next?
It wasn't too terribly involved. It was a while ago, we decided after the committee of committees met, we decided to stay a Brown Act committee. And at a recent town council meeting, I think it was the first one in January, when everything got fleshed out, I think it's a very advantageous place for us to be, particularly for the next 2 years, because those committees that are now non-Brown Act committees do not have council liaisons, right? And so they're operating out there, but it's at a distance, if you will. And I think this is a good time to be in the loop.
Wonderful. Okay, so we're confirming our good choice. Lovely. Okay. I'm very grateful to all of you for this evening. Have a motion to adjourn.
Well, before that, thank
Yes.
you, Chair Titian, for a year of expert leadership yourself.
Thank you. It's an honor to be working with this group.
And your
That's what's
writing
true.
skills are going to serve you so well as our secretary, but that have served us all very well this last year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes. Yes. Known as excellence, and Betsy's excellence are shown every meeting. I think I need someone to move to adjourn. Thank you, Terry. Thanks, Betsy. You guys.
Bye, everyone.